Good evening, everyone. I'm the storyteller, and I am here to help you sleep better with true horror stories. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and like my video. I would love to know where you are from and what time you're watching this video. So please leave a comment to let me know, and I will draw from that experience to tell even better stories. When you are ready, feel free to relax. I have spent 35 years as a truck driver, and during that time, the road has provided me with countless stories. Yet, the most chilling experience I've had occurred not while I was working, but rather on my way home from a family trip. Typically, my year is filled with travels across the country, dispatching goods. However, this particular journey was different. I was returning from a beach vacation with my wife. 2 children embarked on a wonderful and well-deserved vacation after a challenging year of work. However, as the saying goes, good things are short-lived, and it was time to return home. That day, we rose early, gathered our belongings, packed our bags, and bid farewell to the wonderful staff at the small hotel where we stayed. We climbed into our van and began the journey back from the city where we live to the coastal area where we had spent our vacation. The trip is about 14 hours by road, a bit longer since we enjoy taking our time. We paused in quaint towns and popular spots to capture moments and collect mementos. That evening, around 10 p.m., I was navigating the interstate, cruising past a farming community when I caught a glimpse in the rearview mirror. A car was barreling towards us at an alarming speed, seemingly on a direct collision course. I barely had time to react, swerving to the side and nearly veering off the road to evade it. The vehicle zipped by like an arrow, mere millimeters from my truck, and my wife let out a terrified scream. It came perilously close to colliding with us, but thanks to my extensive experience behind the wheel, I managed to steer the car just in time, avoiding that reckless driver. The incident happened so quickly that I couldn't catch a glimpse of the license plate, but I did notice it was a blue Silverado pickup truck. After the close call, I pulled over and checked on my children in the back seat. They were understandably shaken, but assured me they were fine. After a brief moment, I resumed our journey, only to encounter something a few kilometers down the road. As I approached the scene, I noticed a significant traffic jam, with numerous cars halted and their flashing lights illuminating the chaos. Sensing that something was amiss, I parked my vehicle to the side and instructed my wife and kids to remain inside the truck while I ventured out to investigate. Navigating through the line of cars, I soon discovered the cause of the congestion just a few meters ahead. To my astonishment, the very Silverado pickup that had collided with me previously lay about 20 meters off the road, a twisted mass of metal, clearly having overturned in the incident. That caught me off guard, given the rapid approach and the sight of a body draped in a grenade or towel nearby. As I shifted my gaze, I noticed another overturned vehicle further down the road, a black Ford Focus. Just besides it, or what remained of it, lay 4 bodies concealed beneath blankets, likely belonging to some of the individuals present, as the authorities had yet to arrive for recovery. As I moved a bit closer to the Focus, about 10 meters ahead, I noticed that within the chaotic heap of twisted metal, there seemed to be a small foot. I stepped closer to confirm my observation, and indeed, it was a child's foot. A child was still trapped inside the car. I quickly summoned some nearby drivers and shared what I had discovered. Soon, several men joined me, and we began to clear the debris in an effort to rescue the little boy, clinging to the hope that he might still be alive, even though the condition of the car made that prospect seem grim. To rescue him, one of the volunteers assisting in the effort informed us that he had witnessed the crash. According to his account, the driver of the Silverado, seemingly speeding, lost control of the truck and collided with the black Focus, which was carrying a family. Initially thought to have 4 occupants, it was later revealed that there were actually 5 people in that vehicle, none of whom survived the impact. However, it seemed that this child might have been the fortunate one among all the volunteers present, managed to extract the child from the heap of metal, only to discover that it was not a boy but a girl. A tiny soul of about 5 years old who, tragically, did not survive the calamity. As we gently placed her beside the rest of her family, a profound ache pierced my heart. As a father, I couldn't help but empathize with that family, which could have easily mirrored my own had I not acted swiftly. I approached the little girl, a beautiful child who evoked memories of my own daughter at that tender age, and in a moment heavy with emotion, I gently ran my fingers through her long dark hair, brushing her cheeks softly. Tears welled up in my eyes, a testament to the profound helplessness I felt. As I looked up, the sight of an ambulance and a police car drew near, a grim reminder that the tragedy had claimed all lives. The thought struck me hard, how narrowly my family and I had escaped the same fate that night. With the paramedics arriving, I turned away from the scene and made my way back to my truck, my family close by. They inquired about the events, and I recounted everything that transpired. Both my wife and children appeared deeply shocked, likely sharing my thoughts that it could have easily been us. We remained in the car as the authorities managed the accident. After some time, we observed the ambulance departing, followed by the patrol car, leaving only a few traffic agents to clear the scene. Once the road was cleared, we could proceed. As anticipated, the atmosphere shifted dramatically after the incident. We were enjoying music, singing, and sharing jokes, but suddenly, everything shifted to a profound silence on the way home. The image of that little girl lingered in my thoughts, filling me with sadness. It broke my heart to consider her and her family. I couldn't help but picture them as a family returning from a trip, just like us, moments before filled with laughter and dreams for the future. This weighed heavily on me. When we finally arrived home, the silence remained, enveloping my children, Javier and Amanda. 16 and 17 years old, they retreated to their rooms in silence, leaving our belongings untouched in the car. My wife, attuned to my moods like no one else, began brewing coffee the moment we arrived, knowing it soothes my nerves and helps me unwind when I feel this tense. I headed to my room for a shower, yet thoughts of that girl lingered, her image etched in my mind like a photograph. After showering, I approached the sink to brush my teeth, and at one moment, I lifted my face to look at as I gazed into the mirror. A sudden jolt nearly caused me to stumble. There, behind me, stood a little girl. Instinctively, I spun around, but she had vanished. Turning back to the mirror, I found nothing but my own reflection. In that moment, I dismissed it as a mere trick of fatigue. Little did I know, this was merely the onset of a harrowing nightmare. That night, exhaustion overtook me, and the moment my head hit the pillow, I slipped into a profound slumber. However, a while later, I found myself trapped in a terrifying episode of sleep paralysis. I awoke to the haunting sound of a child's voice humming a melody I couldn't recognize. It felt like a song in English or perhaps another language, as the child's voice seemed to babble nonsensical words, reminiscent of when you hear a tune in an unfamiliar tongue and attempt to mimic it. I opened my eyes, desperate to rise, but my body wouldn't obey. Turning my head, I caught a glimpse of my wife peacefully asleep, then glanced the other way to see the clock on the bedside table. It read 3:05 in the morning. I kept searching for the sound, glancing towards the foot of my bed, and there she was, the girl from the accident. She stood there, shrouded in darkness, humming a haunting melody while staring directly at me. In that moment, I attempted to rise, but my body betrayed me. I tried to call out to my wife for help, but I was utterly immobilized, unable to utter a single word. My gaze shifted back to the girl, and I watched in horror as she climbed onto the bedside table, my bed, and began to ascend my body, her form rigid as she progressed. A chilling shiver coursed down my spine. The little girl continued her climb until she reached my chest, resting her head there. At that moment, a piercing pain shot through the left side of my chest. I struggled to move and scream, but my voice was trapped, silent. Yet, the worst was still to come. In an instant, her voice transformed, becoming more spectral and distorted, and then she lifted her head from my chest, rising until her face hovered directly in front of mine. In that moment, I was engulfed by the most profound terror I had ever known. Her hair cascaded down on either side of me, forming a curtain that separated us. Her face was an unnatural, ghostly white, devoid of any humanity, and where her eyes should have been, there were only two empty black voids. My breath caught in my throat, rendering me motionless, unable to scream or even inhale, pain radiating from my chest. Then she leaned in closer, her expression twisting into something deeply sinister. A small smile appeared as I woke from that state. I took a deep breath, only to find myself gasping as my breathing had nearly ceased. My wife stirred, noticing my distress, and inquired about my condition, but words failed me. In that moment, a sudden realization struck me. A sharp pain pierced the left side of my chest. I placed my hands over the spot and urged my wife to contact the emergency room immediately, as I feared I was experiencing a heart attack. She promptly made the call. Fortunately, there's a health center very close to my house, and the ambulance arrived in just a few minutes. The paramedics assisted me, and after several tests, they concluded that it was not a heart attack. They inquired if I had experienced any stress or traumatic events. I shared that the night before, I had witnessed a tragic car accident, and they suggested that I may have suffered a panic attack. The doctor prescribed some pills for my nerves, but they provided little relief. The following nights, that nightmare lingered, repeated endlessly. It was the same haunting nightmare each time. The girl humming that eerie tune while climbing on my body. It was both terrifying and unsettling. Not only that, but she began to manifest everywhere. At any hour of the day, I could spot her lurking in a corner while having lunch with my family, or standing at the entrance of a store, in the cafeteria. She was everywhere. I hesitated to mention anything to my wife, fearing it would only distress her, but the truth was, I felt she was driving me to the brink of madness. Just when I thought it couldn't spiral any further, the worst unfolded. A couple of weeks later, I returned to my job as a truck driver and was assigned my first trip. Strangely, the night before I embarked on the journey, I had no nightmares. I slept peacefully and woke up relaxed, something that hadn't occurred since the night of the accident. Perhaps it was merely an episode of stress from everything that had transpired. I enjoyed my usual morning cup of coffee with my wife, then started my truck and left for the company to pick up the cargo I needed to deliver to the neighboring state that afternoon. Was a brief journey, and I was grateful for that. If everything went smoothly, I could be back home by evening. Everything unfolded as expected. It took about 6 hours to reach the unloading site, and the workers spent another 3 hours unloading. I recognized that I was ahead of schedule, and once the task was completed, I resolved to head back to my city to be home that night. As soon as they finished unloading, I fired up my truck and began the return trip. However, while en route, I decided, as I switched on the radio to pass the time, everything seemed perfectly normal until a familiar tune filled the air. It was the very song the girl had hummed during her unexpected visit to my room. A chill coursed through me, reminiscent of the sensations I experienced each night when she slipped into my bed. Glancing to my side, I was startled to find her sitting in the passenger seat. The shock was overwhelming, prompting me to jerk the steering wheel, sending the truck veering into oncoming traffic. But I quickly regained control. With my eyes fixed ahead, I fought to regain control, but then another truck appeared from the opposite direction. In my attempt to dodge it, I veered off the road. The truck teetered dangerously, yet my extensive experience behind the wheel kicked in, and against all odds, I managed to keep it upright, saving my life in that instant. It was 11:00 p.m. when I leapt from the truck, gasping for breath, as if I had forgotten to inhale during the chaos. I noticed several vehicles had halted, and some drivers were watching intently. When they approached to check on me, I assured them I was fine and that everything was under control, but that was far from the truth. I was losing my mind, and this posed a danger to both myself and others. One of the drivers who stopped was the truck driver I had nearly cut off, and another was coincidentally heading to my city as well. To the first, I offer my apologies, and to the second, I earnestly requested his assistance. I confided that I wasn't feeling well, and the kind man agreed to follow me all the way until I reached my destination. Upon arriving at the company, I expressed my gratitude and positioned myself on standby, ready to assist if needed. That evening, I left the truck at the company but chose not to return home. Instead, I took a cab directly to my parents' house, which was nearby. I felt the urge to share my experiences with someone, and my dad was the first person who came to mind. Having spent most of his life as a truck driver, I knew he would understand. After enjoying a cup of tea lovingly prepared by my mom, I sat down with my dad and opened up about everything. Everything that had transpired in the past few weeks. My father listened intently. When I finished sharing my thoughts, he paused for a moment, then excused himself to his room. He returned with something in his hands, a pendant featuring an image of Saint Christopher, flanked by tiger's eye beads. He explained that this scapular was blessed, noting that St. Christopher is the patron saint of all drivers and travelers, while the tiger's eye serves to ward off evil spirits. My father shared with me that he experienced something akin to this, and he believes many drivers have faced similar situations. He mentioned that tragic events often draw in malevolent entities that thrive on pain and fear. When I touched the little girl's body, filled with the desire to revive her and take her with me, I may have inadvertently opened a door for that specter to latch onto me, tormenting me by usurping her identity. Since that day, I have worn the scapular and have never removed it again. That was 10 years ago. Years have passed, and I have yet to encounter that figure again, nor have I been plagued by nightmares. However, that experience is etched in my memory as the most terrifying moment of my life. My younger sister had just graduated from high school, and as a gift, my mother and I chose to take her on a vacation to Puerto Vallarta. In our family, there are only 3 of us since my father passed away when my sister and I were still young. Since then, my mother has devoted herself to working and caring for us. She took care of us, and although she had a few relationships, she never remarried, so we are a family of 3. We were all very excited about this trip and had planned it for months. However, we faced many setbacks when it was time to leave. First, my sister misplaced her ID. Then, my mom got a cut on her hand while chopping tomatoes for breakfast. If that wasn't enough of a delay, we had a flat tire almost on the road, and I realized I didn't have a spare. I had to take a cab and buy not 1, but 2 tires because I couldn't go on such a journey without them. We embarked on a lengthy journey without a spare tire, and the situation was complicated by our late departure. I was behind the wheel, grappling with my anxiety about driving at night. However, the urgency of our hotel reservation compelled us to hit the road without further delay. Despite my efforts to cover ground quickly, darkness descended, and we remained far from our destination. A glance at the dashboard revealed that I had less than half a tank of gas remaining. But fortunately, the next gas station was less than 20 minutes away, so there was no cause for concern. However, upon arrival, we discovered it was closed, which did raise my anxiety. We began searching the map on our phone for the nearest gas station, but to our dismay, there were none in the vicinity. The closest option was over an hour away, and our fuel was nearly depleted, making it nearly impossible to reach. Just then, I noticed another station about 30 minutes away, but it required us to divert off the main road into a small town that was a bit further out. Miles away, we found ourselves faced with a dirt road, our only option to avoid being stranded without gas in the dead of night. I drove a few miles until we reached the unpaved path on the right. The first thing that struck me was the eerie darkness. The road was narrow, flanked by looming trees. We had to navigate slowly and cautiously, the rocky surface demanding our full attention. Tension filled the air, and it was impossible not to feel it, especially with 3 of us in the vehicle, women alone in a car, venturing into the unknown under the cloak of night. An intense, unexplainable fear gripped me, as if something ominous loomed ahead. My instincts proved correct as we turned onto a dirt road that seemed to stretch endlessly. After what felt like an eternity, the lights of the town flickered in the distance. Yet the journey was far from over. I drove cautiously, and then, in the distance, a procession emerged, a large group of people clad in black. moving solemnly. As we moved slowly along the road towards the village, an air of peculiarity enveloped us. It appeared to be a funeral procession, yet I pondered whether it might simply be a local custom. Admittedly, there was something unsettling about it. We crept closer, unable to glimpse beyond the throng of figures ahead. Curiosity piqued, we resolved to follow the procession, assuming it would lead us to the town. After all, where else could it possibly go? We trailed behind for a while, but suddenly we noticed some lights drawing near, flickering on and off like a warning signal. For a brief moment, I thought it might be someone trying to pass me, but with the procession ahead, there was no way to speed up, so I kept going. Then, glancing in the rearview mirror, I saw that the vehicle, which appeared to be an old pickup truck, had halted. The driver left the lights on, stepped in front of the truck, and began waving his arms at us, shaking his head from side to side, as if trying to convey something. In that instant, I made the choice to halt the car, and he came sprinting towards us. He reached my window, and before I could even utter a polite goodnight, he yelled, "What are you doing, girl?" He directed his anger at my mother and sister, asking if I wanted to die or something. I was left utterly speechless. I managed to respond that I had no idea what he was talking about. He stared at me as if I were out of my mind and asked, "Are you not seeing? Or do you really want to throw yourself off the cliff?" Confusion washed over me, but I turned my gaze forward once more. The procession had vanished, and so had the road. I found myself in the heart of the mountain, and what was even more daunting was the vast ravine just a few meters ahead, starkly visible. It loomed so large that it must have been at least 10 meters deep. Stepping out of the car to get a better look, I realized the drop led to a river strewn with enormous stones. I was completely paralyzed, glancing over to where my mom and sister stood, equally stunned. I turned my gaze upward and questioned the Lord about the whereabouts of the procession. And then the Lord glanced back at me and remarked, "Which procession? There is no procession here. Only 3 souls who sought to leap from a cliff." I was so perplexed and disoriented that all I could do was shake my head. Yet in that instant, I peered past the Lord's shoulder and inquired about the road. He replied that I had strayed from it about a kilometer back, and upon noticing my approach to this area, he had decided to follow me, aware that the only thing ahead was that ravine. Overlooked the river that bordered a good part of the town. He mentioned that he thought I was lost, but he couldn't grasp how I hadn't noticed I was driving over a pile of brush. At the speed I was going, I should have spotted the massive cliff ahead of me much sooner. The man was undeniably correct. The lights illuminated everything clearly, making the ravine easy to see. We then recounted our experience to him, and he seemed quite surprised. He shared that he lived in a nearby town and frequently visited this area. This town was a stop for gas, and he shared that he had heard many legends about the place, yet nothing compared to what we had just recounted. He decided to join us to the village. Eventually, we reached the station and filled our gas tank. That night, we opted for an inn, as I felt uneasy about going any further. The next morning, we set off early, continuing our journey without any more incidents. To this day, the events of that night remain a mystery, and I still get chills whenever I reflect on it. The harrowing experience we narrowly escaped, and my gratitude for that Good Samaritan who truly saved us. My name is Carlos, and the tale I'm about to share is one that has haunted me ever since, leaving me with nightmares that still visit me occasionally. This took place 14 years ago when I was just 22. I began a relationship with a girl named Paula, who resided in a small town on the outskirts of the city. It was a tranquil yet isolated area, and there was only one access road, and Paula was simply amazing. I was deeply in love with her, so the thought of driving several kilometers to see her didn't bother me at all. One day, some cousins of hers came to visit from another state, and Paula asked if I could take them around the city. I happily agreed. That Saturday, I drove to her house to pick her and her cousins up for a little adventure. As usual, I arrived at her place, and she and her cousins climbed into my car, Paula in the passenger seat and her cousins in the back. The night unfolded from there, progressed very well after a walk around the city. We visited a well-known discotheque, enjoyed a few drinks, and had a fantastic time. We left the disco around 3:30 in the morning, which felt a bit late, especially since the town was nearly an hour away. Having had a few drinks, I made sure to keep my speed down the entire way. The last thing I wanted was an accident. By about 4:20 in the morning, we reached the road leading to the entrance of the town. It was quite lonely and dark, which was to be expected. The only destination this dirt road led to was that small town, and at that hour, hardly anyone would be arriving or departing. However, as we approached, we noticed a pickup truck about 400 meters ahead, speeding past us in the opposite direction. I couldn't identify the model, but it appeared new and quite luxurious. I dismissed it, yet it piqued Paula's interest since she had never encountered that truck in town before. Continuing on, we soon spotted a few black garbage bags discarded by the roadside about 200 meters ahead. I mentioned that I was driving slowly, partly due to the dirt road, as I wanted to keep the car clean. When we passed by the side, she suddenly asked me to stop. I halted, confused about her urgency. She then claimed that one of the bags had moved, which took me by surprise. I questioned what she meant by that, and she insisted it had indeed shifted. She wanted to get out and check, believing it might be a small animal, which, unfortunately, isn't uncommon due to the actions of some irresponsible individuals. They discarded their pets as if they were mere refuse, and she believed this to be true. She nearly pleaded with me to allow her to liberate them, and for a moment, I wavered. It was late, and I had work in a few hours, yet I was deeply affected by the situation. It seemed incredibly cruel to abandon the small dog, or whatever was concealed within the bag, to perish. So, I inhaled deeply, unbuckled my seatbelt, and stepped out of the car to investigate the contents of the bags. Paula followed suit, and together we crossed the road, drawing closer to the scene. An unbearable odor lingered in the air, reminiscent of decaying flesh, leading us to speculate that the bags might contain the remains of some unfortunate animal or livestock, given the proximity of a large cattle area. Yet, neither of us was prepared for the truth hidden within those mysterious bags. Upon my arrival, I counted 5 bags, each filled to about half its capacity. I turned to my girlfriend and inquired which one had shifted, and she directed me to the middle bag. Cautiously, I approached and nudged it gently with my foot, careful not to disturb it too abruptly. Hurt the animal that we thought was inside, but it didn't look like there was a dog or anything alive in there. I moved it again with my foot, and then the bag fell off the side. It looked pretty heavy, but seeing that what was inside was not moving, I took out a multi-purpose tool that I always carry with me in my pocket, slid out the small knife inside, and slit the bag to see once and for all what it contained and why it was moving. But when I did it, I could not believe what came out of there. It was a bunch of human parts, hands, forearms, feet. Paula erupted into a scream, her panic propelling her towards the car with a speed that seemed almost supernatural. I, however, felt my legs betray me, nearly collapsing into the grotesque pile of remains before me. Terror gripped me, rendering me motionless, lost in a haze of shock. A ringing began to echo in my ears, intertwining with the frantic drumming of my heart. It was then that one of Paula's cousins seized my arm, yanking me towards the car, urgently insisting we needed to flee, fearing the return of the people in the van. Only then did the gravity of the situation begin to sink in. The moment I finally reacted, I got into my car, started up, and slammed the gas pedal down, leaving a huge dust bowl behind me. Once we arrived at the house, we informed Paula's parents about what we had seen, and they promptly called the police. They soon arrived on the scene. It was already dawn by then, and we had to give statements. We cooperated as much as we could, but requested the officers to keep our identities confidential, as we did not want whoever had committed that monstrosity to be able to identify us in any way. Later, we learned from the press that the remains, what we discovered were the remnants of individuals tied to a perilous criminal organization, and it seemed to be a vendetta executed by a competing faction. Thankfully, everything was resolved. But in the aftermath of that harrowing event, my girlfriend and I were left profoundly shaken, particularly since she witnessed that bag shift almost nightly. I was plagued by nightmares about the incident, and at one juncture, it nearly jeopardized my relationship with Paula, as I found it impossible to traverse that road without recalling the events of that morning. Fortunately, we managed to navigate through it. She comprehended fully, as she had experienced a similar situation. After several months, we decided to live together, and we both sought therapy to navigate the trauma from that harrowing incident. My name is Maria, and I am a pediatrician. Today, I wish to share the most sorrowful yet chilling experience of my life. That night, I was in the car with my father and younger brother, en route to a rural town named Las Pedas, a small and modest coastal community where I was set to undertake some work. Service involved collaboration with another group of doctors from various specialties. That same morning, the bus assigned to us had already departed, but I missed it due to an emergency at the hospital where I worked. I requested a ride, and since I needed to remain in town for the day and the journey would take about 8 hours, I asked my 20-year-old brother to join us to keep our dad company on the return trip. He agreed and accompanied us. I left the hospital around 2 p.m., and we spent nearly an hour more organizing everything and ensuring I had everything necessary since I would be in that location for 15 days. Consequently, we ended up departing around 3 in the afternoon. This caused me some concern because I was aware that night would find us on the road, which I found unsettling, especially since a significant portion of the journey involved dirt roads in poor condition. I was also aware that my dad struggled to see well in the dark. The only thing that provided me with a bit of reassurance was the fact that there wasn't much traffic in that area and that our car. The lights were impressive, but what truly made the journey enjoyable was the lively conversation, the music, and the laughter we shared. My dad's fantastic sense of humor ensures that it's nearly impossible to have a dull moment with him. Since we departed a bit late, darkness began to envelop us around 10 p.m. As we navigated through the final villages before arriving at Las Pedas, I couldn't help but admire the stunning scenery. The area was dotted with charming fishing villages, and in certain stretches, the sea was tantalizingly close to the road. I felt a pang of regret that it was nighttime and that I was pressed for time, as I would have relished the chance to pull over and enjoy a refreshing swim at the beach. However, we soon veered away from the coastal road, continuing on our journey. We found ourselves in an expansive agricultural region, with vast stretches of land flanking the road. After about 15 minutes on that seemingly endless path, where houses were nowhere in sight, a small figure appeared in the distance. It was a little girl, no older than 7, pedaling her bicycle towards us. In that moment, an eerie silence enveloped us, broken only by my brother's teasing remark about the classic ghostly girl of the road. But then, the car's headlights caught her off guard, causing her to lose control and tumble to the side. On the asphalt, Dad quickly pulled the car over, but then we noticed the lights of a massive truck barreling towards us. Before we could react, this enormous vehicle thundered past, and I can still hear the collective screams that erupted from us, a chorus of panic. We held our breath, frozen in disbelief, as the long truck rolled over the very spot where the little girl had fallen. A wave of horror washed over me, accompanied by a sharp pain in my chest. In an instant, we all scrambled out of the car and rushed to the scene, but when we arrived, there was nothing, no trace of the girl, no trace of the bicycle, just the empty and silent road. We were very puzzled because the lights of our car illuminated the place perfectly. We could even see all that stretch of road and much of the surroundings, but while we stood there in the middle of nowhere looking at each other in total shock, we saw a tractor approaching and stopping on the side of the RO. Right in front of us, the driver got off the tractor. A man in his 40s approached us and said, "Don't search for her. She's absent, an illusion, just like the truck." We remained in stunned silence, grappling with the bewildering events unfolding around us. Finally, Dad shattered the quiet, turning to the man and asking, "Have you seen her?" The man nodded, replying that nearly all the travelers who pass through here have encountered her at least once. "Who is she?" I inquired, and he gestured for us to follow. We moved a few paces forward, navigating through some bushes. He parted the branches slightly and pulled aside some weeds, revealing a chapel adorned with a delicate plaster angel perched atop its structure. Inside, a small metal cross stood solemnly, encircled by remnants of candles and faded flowers, bearing the name of a girl. Beneath it, the dates of her birth and death were inscribed, the latter marking April 17th, 1997. This poignant scene unfolded for us in 2013, by which time the girl would have been 16 years old when she departed from this world. The farmer recounted that she was the daughter of a couple who resided on a modest farm nearby. She would often venture out to ride or bike in the afternoon, just like any other child. However, that day, she stepped onto the road, and that was when the tragic accident unfolded before our eyes. Hearing this, I couldn't shake the profound sadness that enveloped me, as it pained me to imagine that the spirit of that little girl was ensnared in that dreadful moment, caught in a sort of time loop. Afterwards, we bid farewell to the farmer, expressing our gratitude for his effort to come and share the details with us. He reassured us that it was nothing he couldn't handle. He organized himself in case we returned one day and went on his way, while we did the same, getting into the car and continuing our journey. However, after that incident, things were never quite the same. Since that day, I have always included that little girl in my prayers, asking God to help her find peace. For 5 years, I have been working in a warehouse that is 2 hours away from my city, requiring me to travel each day to fulfill my job and provide for my family. The roads I traverse daily to accomplish this are renowned for its notorious criminal activity, particularly after dark. I make it a point to head home swiftly right after finishing my shift at 5:00 p.m. I hop into my car and head towards my city, racing against the encroaching night. I usually arrive home around 7:30, when the darkness is just beginning to settle, leaving some light on the road. Yet, there was one particular evening when, due to a colleague's oversight, I was able to leave early, not just for myself, but for all my fellow colleagues who were stuck working late. After putting in several extra hours to tackle an operational issue, I found myself leaving work at 8 p.m., with daylight fading fast. Night fell swiftly, and I felt a wave of anxiety wash over me, knowing my wife and 3 children were waiting for me at home. As I stepped out of the store and onto the road, I noticed it was already 8:50 p.m. All I could do was pray to God and the saints before embarking on that dark and perilous journey. Thankfully that, on a night when the moon shone brightly, the road was bathed in light and the traffic flowed smoothly, making it feel less desolate than usual, likely due to it being a Saturday. During the initial stretch of my journey, all seemed well. Nothing unusual caught my eye. This road, predominantly frequented by trucks in the industrial zone, has earned a reputation for danger. The presence of road pirates and frequent accidents, often attributed to the carelessness of truck drivers, adds to its perilous nature. Why I always strive to be careful after driving for more than an hour, hoping for nothing unfortunate to occur. I reached a toll booth that marks the midpoint of my daily journey on the highway, which I consider the safest route. As I approached, I noticed that most booths were unoccupied. I rolled down my window to make my payment, but the attendant inside appeared quite preoccupied. I attempted to get her attention several times, yet she seemed unresponsive. Her silence puzzled me. She merely stared ahead, unresponsive to my repeated good nights. I wondered if perhaps she was upset or dissatisfied with her situation, lingering there against her will. Just then, a man leant out of the window in the last booth, gesturing for me to approach. I extended my hand out the window, signaling my intent to come over, and then turned towards the direction of the booth. The girl was supposed to inform her that she was rude, but she was absent, which unsettled me for a moment. The only door in the booth was on the side where I was parked, and had she exited that way, I would have noticed. However, I didn't dwell on it much. I assumed there might be another small door on the opposite side. I moved to the last booth where another employee was stationed because, truthfully, I was anxious and eager to get home soon with a long journey ahead. I quickly reached the other booth or this. The man approached me, and the first thing he said was, "Excuse me, this booth is the only one in operation at this time of day." He then handed me my ticket, leaving me in deep thought. Despite my hurry, I couldn't help but ask him why the booth where I had initially parked, the one with the girl, wasn't working. He looked surprised and inquired about which girl I meant. I described her as the one in booth 1 with long red hair. At that, he laughed nervously and shook his head, as if my words had puzzled him greatly. He turned to me and inquired if it was true that I'd seen that girl there. I replied with utmost seriousness that I had. It was then that he revealed that 2 weeks prior, he had 2 coworkers, one of whom matched the description I had provided. However, a week ago, a van belonging to a notorious criminal group in the area had abducted the young woman who worked in the same booth where I had parked. Since then, there had been no news about her, which prompted the other young woman to resign, gripped by fear that the same fate could befall her. When I heard this, I felt a deep sadness wash over me. If what I had seen was indeed the spirit of the girl, it meant she had not escaped those men alive. Yet, the mere thought of having encountered a ghost sent chills down my spine. I pondered this all the way home, unable to fathom what her family must be enduring, living in uncertainty and clinging to the hope that one day she might return home alive. My name is Armando, and I have spent over 15 years working as a cab driver. If you believe I have a wealth of captivating tales to share, you are indeed correct. However, the one I recount today stands out as the most harrowing experience I've ever faced, not just in my career, but throughout my entire life. This incident took place in 2018, on what seemed like an ordinary day, just an ordinary day, around 11 p.m. As I prepared to head home for some much-needed rest before the next morning, my phone rang. It was my friend Frank, asking me for a favor. He wanted me to drive him to meet a girl he had connected with on Tinder, with plans to spend the night together. Exhausted, I expressed my apologies and suggested he find another cab driver, as I was completely worn out and just wanted to sleep. However, he pressed on, mentioning he didn't have enough money for a cab that night, promised me that as soon as he received his paycheck, he would pay me double if I wanted. So, in addition to the fact that he would make me lose hours of sleep, it turns out he wasn't going to pay me at all. What a good deal. In the end, I accepted and took him to the girl's house. She lived in a middle-class neighborhood, tucked away in a secluded area of the city. I left him there and arranged to pick him up the next morning. By then, it was already midnight, a time when I was supposed to be home. However, my night was far from over because just as I was about to, as I departed the complex, I caught sight of a woman standing at the gate of a residence, sheltered beneath a tree. She gestured for me to approach, and for a fleeting moment, I considered bypassing her and moving on. However, I ultimately resolved to offer this final act of kindness. After all, I'd already been unsettled from my rest. I shifted into reverse, aligning my vehicle beside her. She was a tall blonde in her 40s, clad in a short, loose-fitting white dress that resembled a robe, capturing my attention. It was a chilly night, and her dress was notably low-cut, drawing my gaze as she settled into the back seat. I shifted the rearview mirror to catch a glimpse of her, and then she requested a drive to a residential area nearly on the opposite side of the city. This piqued my interest, as the journey would take about an hour and a half on the highway, especially at midnight when traffic was sparse. Yet, the reality was that we never reached that destination. She remained mostly silent, and I attempted to engage her in conversation. When I noticed her responses were limited to yes and not yet, I decided to cease my efforts. She was undeniably attractive, exuding an air of affluence, yet there was a certain disarray about her. The dim lighting made it difficult to discern details, but it appeared she wore no makeup. Her only adornment, a red silk scarf elegantly tied around her neck. Her eyes frequently drifted towards the window, though they seemed devoid of focus. Occasionally, the flickering lights from the avenue would cast a soft glow on her features, revealing a striking beauty. Her striking green eyes appeared adrift, seemingly untouched by the world around us. Noticing his disinterest, I opted to switch on the radio, hoping the music would fill the silence during what promised to be a lengthy drive. About 20 minutes in, as we navigated through a dense forest, she unexpectedly requested that I pull over and venture into the woods. I wanted to dismiss it as a jest, yet she carried an air that suggested humor was not her forte. She pressed the request, still avoiding my gaze, and I stopped, unsure of what to do next. I was puzzled. We both sat in silence for a few minutes, me glancing at her through the rearview mirror, her gaze fixed on the window. Finally, I broke the silence, telling her that I couldn't go through with it. It wasn't just that I couldn't. The whole situation began to frighten me. With everything happening in the world, 1,000 scenarios raced through my mind. What if she was a criminal? A psychopath? What if she had henchmen lurking in the forest, waiting for me to traffic people or organs? What was I thinking? What happened left me feeling quite unsettled. To my astonishment, she exited the car in silence and ventured into the forest alone, as if nothing had transpired. I was completely baffled, unable to grasp the situation. For a fleeting moment, I contemplated stepping out to follow her or coax her back, but I must confess that fear got the better of me. I chose instead to retreat along the path I had taken. As I did, the car's headlights illuminated the area of the forest where she had disappeared, but she was nowhere to be seen. I attempted to peer through the trees, yet there was nothing, an emptiness as if the earth had consumed her. Eventually, I turned back, but an unsettling feeling lingered, a sense that something was amiss. It felt so strange that I questioned whether it had all been a figment of my imagination. The following day, I sought out my friend, but I hesitated to share my experience. In truth, I confided in no one, as I found myself doubting my own sanity. Days slipped by, yet the image of that woman haunted my thoughts, persistent and unyielding. She spent countless hours, day and night, searching for some semblance of logic or an explanation, but nothing came to light. However, a little over a week later, all the answers arrived in the most unexpected manner. That day, as was my routine, I left for work early and stopped by the local coffee shop to grab a coffee and a newspaper. It was there that I received the biggest shock of my life. On the front page, in bold letters, a note proclaimed that after 18 years, the remains of Mrs. Helena Martin, the missing wife of a well-known figure, had been found. Businessman Ernesto Martin has finally been rescued, and beneath the press release was a photograph of the woman who, of course, was exactly the same woman I had picked up in my cab that day. She lived right in the house where I found her. Reading this made my blood run cold, and my coffee cup hit the floor. But that wasn't all. It turns out the remains were discovered in a shallow grave in the woods adjacent to Perimeter Avenue, right where I left her. On the next page, there was a photograph of the white dress, torn, and time has torn apart the story of the red scarf, which captivated me that night and is said to have been used in her burial. The note revealed that the crime was perpetrated by her own husband. After 18 years, confessed to committing the act on the very night she vanished in 2000. Intriguingly, he believed she was unfaithful with a cab driver and consumed by jealousy. He strangled her with his own scarf while she slept. He then placed her in the car and drove her to the location where he buried her. I hope your day is filled with health and joy. I invite you to subscribe to my channel to hear true horror stories. Hello, and see you again.